So this presentation is called Music Across the World, Across Time, and Across Species. The title is maybe a little bit ambitious, just in a sense like asking you questions that do involve music across the world, music across time. I do give you some information on music across species, and in the next several videos we talk more and more about music across the world and music across time. But I just wanted to start you off in the most general way possible. Since this is a class in music theory, it's called music theory, but it's important to ask, what is music? What's the theory, and what actually are we studying in this class? An overview of the presentation, which is again somewhat ambitious. What is music? What's music theory? And is there one music theory, or are there many? No, I'm asking these questions. I'm saying it's an overview, but I should just let you know we don't actually answer these questions in the presentation, right? These are open-ended questions. However, in the past when I've taught this class, and I think in the past when anybody has ever taught this class, it's pretty much assumed that just everybody knows what music is and everybody knows what music theory is and so on. And then you just go in and you start learning stuff. And as a result, I feel like a lot of creativity gets shut down right away, you know, not intentionally and not consciously, but creativity, openness, yeah, and really like those are the things that are most important. Being creative is like making things, right? So if you're shutting down certain avenues of making things, that's like a big deal. And then openness to learning about things, you're just like shutting down or shutting certain doors of stuff that might actually be interesting. So I'm hoping to keep those doors open and maybe even welcome you through those doors, and you might find some stuff in there that I had no idea was going to be there. What's music? Music obviously has something to do with sound. Music almost always involves the act of making a sound, like so physically doing something. You could sing, you could drum, you could blow, you could pluck, you could bow. Well, I want to point out that you can also listen to natural sounds, so like a dog just barked and I can hear an air conditioner coming in through my window. You can listen to natural sounds as if they were music. And this is something that John Cage, who's a composer from the middle 20th century, super influential, almost some people call him a music philosopher, but he lived off of Fifth Avenue, I believe, in New York, and spent a lot of time listening to the traffic as if it were music. It also, I'm going to go back, I want to point out this at the top of the page, Marcel Duchamp's Fountain, could be Fouton in French, but a so-called ready-made sculpture. This is from 1917. This is just a urinal, but he just took a urinal, put it in an art museum and said, that's art. In that case, there's something similar here. He didn't really do anything in terms of making. He just perceived the visual object as if it were a sculpture, right? He's sort of saying, use your art apparatus to pay attention to this thing. And the same could be said for what John Cage is saying about music. This suggests that there's a musical or aesthetic way of listening, that you could just listen to your environment as if it were music, and that does something maybe a little bit different. So in many cultures, music is often combined with dance, and maybe even be like always combined with dance in certain cultures. And then in many other cultures, music always involves singing. In many cultures, there may be no standalone concept for instrumental music. Now, let's just pay attention to, let's focus on what I'm calling music today in our tiny corner of the world, our tiny moment in history. So our tiny corner of the world being, let's just say it's New Mexico, and our tiny moment in history, I'll give you a little diagram on a later page for you to think about that. And then also our tiny, you know, like your age group, you guys have a slightly younger age group than me, but I listen to music in a completely different way than like my parents do, and certainly than my grandparents did, right? I mean, there's just like huge differences across generations in how people listen to music and what they listen to. How frequently do you listen to songs, let's assume that they're songs with words, compared to pieces or works of instrumental music? Do you ever listen to or play music that has no sound whatsoever? If you do, be curious to know what it is. Here is a good journal question for you. Can you think of any ways of producing sound that don't involve singing, drumming, By drumming, I just mean hitting something. Blowing over a hole, like you do with a flute. Plucking a string, or bowing a string. So plucking a string kind of like with a guitar, or playing pits on a violin. Bowing a string, like violin, cello, viola. In answering this question, you could just ignore anything that uses electricity. So speakers do push and pull the sound, and that's how they create pressure. But let's just ignore that for now, or ignore like the act of pressing play on Spotify. So I just put that up here. Journal question. This is one of the things you can put in the journal, the online journal, in response after you watch this video. Can you think of ways of producing sound that do not involve singing, drumming, blowing, plucking, or bowing? Okay, and then this meditative exercise kind of relates to stuff we were talking about on the previous screen. This is just optional, just for fun, but go take a walk around your neighborhood by yourself, and then listen to the sounds that you're hearing by pretending that you're listening to an audio recording of a streetscape. So if I'm out in my neighborhood right now, I can but I'm hearing sounds normally, but I'm kind of pretending I'm listening on headphones. And I can hear footsteps. I can hear like some cars, some dogs barking, things. And if I just keep reminding myself to try to think of that as I'm listening to an audio recording of those things. It's interesting meditative exercise, and it's also similar to that idea on the previous page that you can listen to natural sounds as if they were music. The elements of music. What I mean by elements, I mean pitch, rhythm, harmony, meter. Where do these things come from? On the screen, I just want to focus on the difference between a pitch collection and a scale. And then we're actually going to be talking about scales officially in, I think it's week 4 of this. So we have some time to really think deeply about this, which I think is going to be fun. A pitch collection, by definition, is the set of pitches that are available to a composer or performer on a given instrument in a given musical style. Now, that is a very semi-complex definition, but it's a very simple concept. So for an instrument like a piano or a harp, marimba, the pitch collection is equivalent to the complete set of the keys, or the strings, or the wooden bars on the instrument. So if I had a piano has 88 keys. Inside the piano, there's there's more than 88 strings, but there's 88 sets of strings. Most of them have double strings or triple strings, but 88 sets of strings. So there's 88 different sounds that I could produce on the piano, and they're all tuned in a specific way. Let's say you're going to go teach in front of a preschool class, and you're going to play some tune that only uses the notes in C major, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. But you have all these individual xylophone pieces that you could hand out to each kid, but it's for the whole chromatic scale. So you know the pieces in C major. You're going to teach this preschool class to play the right note at the right time. You only need to bring out the pitch collection of the notes that you're going to use in that song, the C, D, E, F, G, A, B. You can leave in the instrument closet the C sharp, the D sharp, the F sharp, G sharp, and A sharp. In the voice, or on a stringed instrument without frets, it's much more difficult to determine just by, say, looking at the voice or looking at the instrument without frets, like the violin, what the pitch collection is. But it's an easier question to answer if you have certain instruments, like the ones we talked about above. Now, a scale, what's the relationship between scale and pitch collection? Scale is just a pitch collection that's arranged from low to high. Okay, let's say with that preschool class, maybe preschool is a little bit too young for this, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, I don't know. But let's say I was having the students play Happy Birthday. And let's say there's 7 students, and I'm going to give them all the notes of a C major scale, and I just have to tell the kid who has G to play the G, and then I have the kid who has got the A note play the A, and then I have to have the kid who has the G play the G again, and then I have to have the kid who has the C next play his C, and then the kid who has a B, she's got to play the B next, right? That would give me the first 5 notes of Happy Birthday. That would be the order that they're in that song, G, A, G, C, B. But if I just take all those individual notes, right, because each of these kids has a little marimba piece or something like that, and if I line them up from low to high, all the notes that are in the song, say, or in that part of the song, range from low to high or from high to low, then that's a scale. Here is, I think, the main question that I think is interesting about this. Which comes first in any given culture? Are instruments made which are tuned to pre-existing scales. Like, do scales come first, and then when instrument makers make instruments like pianos and harps and marimbas, they tune those instruments to the scales that already exist, to the notes that the culture is already using? Or are scales just the ordered collection of notes found on instruments? So like maybe instrument makers go around making instruments, and there's no such thing in the mind as a scale, say, but then someone at some point comes along and says, hey, you got all those notes on all the instruments, let's arrange them from low to high, and let's call that a scale. This is my question to you. This is another thing that you can put in the journal. So journal question, compare and contrast pitch collection and scale, which is sort of the top part of this slide. And then, which do you think might come first in any given culture? Question: is music unique to humans? And then a sub-question under that is, well, what do you mean by music? Humans haven't been around for all that long. Now, you might be like, well, what does that mean? What does long mean? This is a clock. At the top, the Earth is formed. So the Earth is formed 4.5 billion years ago. The whole universe is only about 12 billion years old. So the universe is 12 billion years old, which is not really all that long. I mean, who knows? But the universe is around for 12 billion years, and at some point, or it's around for 7.5 billion years, and then like a supernova explodes or something like that. And then there's a bunch of dust and stuff up there, and then it congeals into the form of our solar system, which is our sun and the Earth and the other planets in our solar system. And I think all the planets in our solar system all formed at around that same time, at 4.5 billion years ago. Our solar system basically forms 4.5 billion years ago. There isn't life on the planet for, I think, only about 500,000 years. And then you start to get like unicellular organisms. And then eventually you get multicellular organisms. Earth, 4.5 billion years ago, is at the top here. Then some organisms. So not really too long after the Earth is formed, which is very interesting. But, you know, they're all like just very, very, very simple microorganisms, single-celled, or not even cells at first. Anyway, then they get cells. They get a little bit more complex, but they're still not, you know, multicellular organisms. They're not vertebrates. Then right around here, where you get fish, is where you start to get vertebrates. So this ends up being 450 million years ago or so, or maybe like 550 million years ago. Around here with fish and then reptiles, you get hearing and vocalization. But you have to keep going around a lot. And there's our dinosaurs, and the dinosaurs go extinct. Then mammals take off once dinosaurs get extinct. Then you get primates around here. That's exciting. And then only at the very end do you get anything even closely resembling a human. So everybody on the Earth right now is related to all the other people on the Earth by a common ancestor of about 150,000 years ago. That's pretty recent. That's called mitochondrial Eve. It's sort of as in Adam and Eve, but you figure it out by looking at people's mitochondria. That's super recent. Like, everybody is related to one another. Well, all humans are like cousins of one another, fairly close cousins. And then like the earliest, like the time that we diverged from chimpanzees is 7 million years ago. So 7 million years ago, we diverged from chimpanzees. And then everybody on the Earth is related from a much, much more recent time, which is, I think, 150 million or 150,000 years ago. That's just to put this in perspective. The question is, so let's assume, you know, the question about, is music unique to humans? Obviously, lots of different humans do music in different ways. Even like, you know, you and your brother or your sister who might be all living in the same house and raised in the same way, and you might like totally different types of music and like to play it in different ways. Some of you might, you know, have siblings that don't like it at all, even though if you're raised in the same way, and you guys obviously do because you're in this class. But we tend to think of music as being unique to humans, and that's pretty much because we define music in certain ways. You know, like it has chords, or it has major chords, or it has specific intervals, or, you know, it's like the combination of words and pitches over chord progressions, right? Okay, if you define music that way, then yes, only humans have it. But what's interesting to think about is that vocalization on this clock goes back all the way over to here. Hearing and vocalization, probably around the time of fish, that our ancestors diverged from fish. That would be about 450 million years ago. We think of music as being unique to humans, but depending on how you define it, at least in many respects, it's not unique to humans. Fish sing. At least some fish sing. So there's a fish that I've been interested in over the last couple of years. It's called the plain-fin midshipman. And the male plain-fin midshipman sings a long duration complex tone. That just means, goes, so it does it for a long time. It can do it for like an hour or more. Basically sings all night long. And then it's complex, meaning it's not a simple tone. It's got some upper partials, and that's like a physics term. So don't worry about that too much right now. We'll talk about it in one of the next lectures. So, and 100 hertz is basically G2 at the bottom of the bass clef staff. So it's really right around, and you'll hear it in this video that I'll play you in 1 second. And it does that to attract females. So the male uses his swim bladder to generate the sound, which differs from what humans do, right? When we use our larynx and vocal cords. And it's actually frogs, birds, reptiles, mammals, all of them use the larynx and the vocal cords. But fish, a lot of them do use the swim bladder. The swim bladder is actually kind of like, it's homologous to the human lung. So it's a little bit different. You might say, okay, well, what makes that fish, well, why are we calling it singing? Well, it turns out that the brainstem nuclei that control the swim bladder and the fish that make it go those same nuclei control the larynx in humans. I know you probably don't believe me, but it's true. It's fascinating. And that's the same like pretty much across all vertebrates. So the thing that allows you to sing, to produce pitches with your vocal cords, is something that is shared by all animals that we're related to over about the last 450 million years. So there's a big male humming under his little rock. So he's created this nest. He's trying to lure a female there. Female comes. She's like, oh, this might be interesting. And then he bites her on the head 3 times. And, the humming stops when he bites her and then starts right over again. It's a little bit weird, but then she's like, okay, this is the place I'm going to lay my eggs. So she then, after the video ends and they get some privacy, she goes and lays her eggs on the roof of that little nest that he has there, and then he goes along and fertilizes them. Frogs sing. And frog songs are almost all more complex than the one-note hum of that midshipman fish that I just showed you. Frog calls usually have at least 2 notes. Some of them really just have, are extremely simple. Some of them do have just like 1 sound. Some of them have 2 sounds. This one in the corner, I'm going to play you, that has 28 sounds. So that's by far the most of any amphibian that they've found. And they think it can recombine those individual syllables. So that's huge. But most frogs, 2 syllables, maybe 1 syllable. Individual frogs can recognize one another by their distinct calls. So 2 frogs of the same species, by various experiments, playback experiments, you can tell that one frog knows who his neighbors are by just the sound of their call. Closely related species might look similar, but they often have very different call structures. So, and that's actually a means of speciation. So in frogs are kind of always trying to speciate, because the more you can separate off from a related group, I don't know, he could go, right? So he's changing the duration of that first sound. Or he might go, and that is just easier to do for whatever reason. It's presumably because like you'd have to have like a different musculature or a different apparatus to produce different sounds entirely. So it's much easier to do than to go, right, where I'm changing pitch and then also timbre. To make those changes, it's just more complex. When I was saying that frogs often speciate by distinguishing their calls, that's usually going to be a difference in the timing component, the rhythmic component. Really fascinating when you think about what makes one melody. Let's say you're writing a song and the melody that you're using sounds too much like some other melody. What do? I think our brains naturally think, oh, I have to change the notes. And then same with chords. You have the same chords as some other song and you think, oh, I should change the chords because they're the same. But you might just think about changing the timing of the notes or the timing of the chords, and I bet you can make it sound like it's a different song entirely just by changing notes and timing. These two complex concepts, or they're complex words, but they're pretty straightforward. So frequency modulation and amplitude modulation are things that are common in frog vocalizations, and in all their animal vocalization, a little bit less so in fish. So frequency modulation just means you're changing the frequency. And then amplitude modulation just means you're changing the amplitude, which is the loudness. But I'm going to give you some examples. In human music, when we do vibrato, we're actually doing both at the same time, but usually vibrato is mostly frequency modulation. So instead of going, ah, we do, ah, right? If I do vibrato slow, it's ah. So I'm changing the frequency up and down really quickly. And if I do amplitude modulation, that would be making the sound go louder and softer. So, and if you speed that up, and if you speed it up really fast, it might sound like, right? So a rolled R is basically amplitude modulation. Those kinds of things are super common in frog vocalizations. Listeners habituate to stimulation. So if like the frog's always going, a listener hears it once and like isn't super into it, and like it just won't work anymore on that listener if it keeps doing exactly the same thing. So maybe that's when you go, you just change it subtly, and it just makes the auditory system of the listener less likely to block it out. In smaller groups, if there's not so many signalers, like singers in a group, they want to attract mates from far away. So it's better for them if they can cooperate, if they can make their calls at the same exact time that makes them louder and attract mates from far away. If they're in larger groups, then they're probably going to be heard really well from far away. The whole group is, but they're in like really intense competition with one another to stand out. So they do things a little bit differently in both cases. In the first case, they try to do their signals at the same time. In the latter case, when they're competing, they try to do their signals at different times. And these are things that all animals do with their vocalizations. And then listeners, like frog listeners, have some preferences that are pretty much universal. So for the most part, female frogs listening to male frogs sing, they almost always like it better if the sound is lower and if the call is louder. And what it may simply be is that those sounds that are lower and louder, drive the auditory system in a way that's just much more effective than quieter or higher pitched sounds. It's just something interesting about, it's really like the number of neurons in the auditory system that respond to lower sounds and louder sounds is greater. So to create any effect in the listener's brain, lower and louder sounds often just are more effective. But then each species is going to have preferences that are unique to that species, right? Because there's a whole bunch of frogs of different species singing in the same exact pond. They've all got to be singing on different channels, basically. And then the listener is pretty attuned to, therefore, the specific timbre, the specific pitch or pitch contour, or the rhythmic properties, but is not always going to listen to just the sound that's lowest or the loudest, right? They're going to listen for specific syllables. That's so like you're going through the radio and you're listening for, either a specific genre of music you like or for a tune that you recognize, right? So it's that same sort of thing. Okay, and then this is one of these like additionally super fascinating things that listeners and singers in frogs co-evolve. With human music, we tend to think, okay, the people who write songs, the people who are composers, making pieces, and performers who are going out and playing pieces, we tend to think that they drive what listeners like to listen to. And they do in some sense, like when the Beatles started writing the Beatles music, or Elvis started writing Elvis music, or John Coltrane started performing John Coltrane music. Listeners like adapted and recognized, hey, I want to listen to that stuff, right? But listeners also definitely drive, their listener preferences drive what signalers do. So if everybody starts listening to the Beatles or Elvis or John Coltrane, then all the other bands that are playing other things are going to start, many of them might start making music like one of those sets of artists because listeners have now adapted to like this certain sound. Listeners really drive composition and performance just about every bit as much as the performers and composers do. And that's the same in frog singing. Birds, obviously, sing, as we know. There's 50,000 species of birds that sing. So there's lots of birds that don't sing. So ostriches, chickens, ducks, all of those guys vocalize, but they don't sing. All songbirds have to hear their song at least once during a critical period in order to be able to sing it in adulthood. That means birds learn their songs. I don't think that's the case with frogs at all or with the fish. Songbirds are special in that they have to hear their song. They have to learn it in the course of their lifetime. But what's super interesting is that their brain is not like a tape recorder. They can't just learn any song. For a bird like the zebrafinch can only learn the song of the zebrafinch. It still has to hear it once in its life for it to really set in, but it can only learn that song. But that's the case with the zebrafinch, and the zebrafinch only sings one song. It like goes through a period where it learns its song, and it learns it from a tutor, just like we learn pieces of music from teachers or from recordings, and then just sings that one song its whole life. But other birds learn a set of syllables that are common to their species, but these birds can recombine them in numerous ways. So the Bengalese finch is an example. And up here, you have a zebrafinch there, and you have a Bengalese finches in the middle. And they're closely related, but they obviously do this kind of different thing with their songs. And I'm going to show you that on the next pages. I know you're going to be like, oh my God, that's too complex, but I think you're going to also secretly love it. Okay. And then there are bird species, a few of them, that can learn completely new syllables and then combine them in all kinds of crazy ways. So examples are lyrebirds, mockingbirds. I should have put parrots on there, but parrots can also do that. We know that parrots can learn to speak human stuff. They can sing melodies. So parrots can learn new syllables, just like syllables of speech, and the individual notes. And parrots can recombine them to match what humans do. And that's a similar thing that lyrebirds and mockingbirds do. This is from a different presentation that I use in my musical brain class, but I think it's kind of cool, so I'm just going to indulge in it. Hope you like it. So zebrafinches, as I said, learn only a single song. Bengalese finches instead learn a kind of formula for improvising, and I want to show you how that works, and I want to show you how it's connected to music theory. The stereotyped song is the zebrafinch, and the flexible song is the Bengalese finch. Again, this is from my musical brain class, so it is a little bit more complex, but just relax and enjoy. It's much easier to account for the encoding of a single song in the brain than it is to account for the ability to generate an infinite number of possible songs through syntactic recombination. In zebra finches, right, the ones that have just a single song, the learning of a single song type can be accounted for by this idea of the synaptic chain. You don't need to pay attention to this, but the idea is, let's say this is note number 1, note number 2, note number 3, number 4, like these red circles. Your brain could just say like, okay, as soon as you finish note number 1, then go on to note number 2. And as soon as you're done with note number 2, go on to note number 3. And so you could really hardwire that into your brain. And if you're only going to ever sing one song in your life, it wouldn't be hard to do that. So if you're going to program a computer to be able to sing just one song, it really is kind of easy. So, but for the Bengalese finch, it's something more complex. So here we've got A, B, C, D, E. So it's assumed these are all syllables, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. If you start your song with syllable A,
you often go to syllable B, but you might go to syllable I. If you're on syllable B, let's say we started on A, and you're on syllable B, you might go to C and you might go to D. If you're on syllable C, you might go to F, or it looks like you have to go to F if you're on syllable C, if you're going to go anywhere. If you're on F, you could go to A, you could go to B. I just want to compare it with English language a little bit. You can think of this like, let's say this is the word, A is the word the. If you're on the word the, you have a strong likelihood of going to a noun after the word the, but it's possible that you could go to an adjective, and you could also go to an adverb. Similarly, if you're on an adjective, let's say B is an adjective is often going to go to a noun. The idea here that, and let's just say like this is the tonic note A is, then the tonic note might go up to scale degree 2, or in this case it might go down to, let's say that's scale degree 7. You can think of this as a map for improvising. You don't need these terms finite state, grammar, and transition diagrams. It doesn't matter. But in this diagram, syllables are given arbitrary names, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. Okay, those are syllables for the Bengalese finch. Diagram shows both how syllable tends to be approached and how it tends to be left. So I was saying from A, you can go to B or you can go to I, and then A can be approached by F. How you leave that syllable, A goes to B or I, is called its branching. A goes to B or I, B could go to C, D, or J, C goes to F. Okay. And then how you get there, how it's approached, is called its junction. A is always approached from F. B could be approached from A or F. C could be reached only through B. Then you can make this little diagram, right? This is just reminding you, don't freak out, this is just for fun. But for syllable B, the notes that go into syllable B are either A or F, and the notes that go out of B are C or D or J. We actually could do this as notes just for a second. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And let's just ignore those. So A goes to B. Oh, we can't go to I. Whatever. Okay. F, A, B, B, D, B, C, C, F, E, F, D, E, F, B, D, E, F, G, D, E, F, A. Right, so we could really think of this as a system for improvising. By following these rules, an infinite number of possible songs could be produced. And while the progression from syllable to syllable is at the same time by no means random, but it is infinite, the number of possibilities that you can get. That's what happens with the Bengalese finch song. I actually don't have a Bengalese finch song to play you right now, but maybe in a later video. So let me just show you how you would apply this to chords. Now, obviously, we'll talk about chords later in the semester. We're not talking about chords too much right now, but this is, again, just to get you thinking about the relationship between human music and the way sort of like all life uses sounds and vocalizations. Okay. On the previous screen, I just had all the chords: a 1 chord, 2 chord, 3 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, 6 chord, 7 chord. Don't worry if this is confusing for you. There's this one standard way in which the chords progress, like 5 chord goes to 1, as we'll see. The 2 chord goes to 5, as we'll see. We get to that in the second semester. Second semester, we also know that 6 goes to 2 and 3 goes to 6. So you get 3 going to 6, going to 2, going to 5, going to 1. 1 often wants to go to 4. 4 doesn't really want to go to 7, but it kind of does. And then if you're on 7, it often really wants to go back to 1. But in this standard progression, 1, 4, 7, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. Okay, so that's all you got to know for now. Just accept that as like, that's the standard. But then there's some additional ways of kind of like short-circuiting the standard patterns. Like I said, 7 wants to go to 1. 3 often goes to 4. 4 often goes directly to 2. 5 wants to go to 1, but it could go to 6. 1, we know that 5 goes to 1, but 1 actually can go also to 5. There's all these secondary transitions. Just like on the previous page, like if this is A, we saw that A goes to B, or it could go to J. That's exactly the same thing that we're saying is here. The 1 chord wants to go to 4, but it could go to 5. And in fact, 1 can really go just about anywhere. Yeah, 1 can go to any of these chords. Like for instance, 7 diminished doesn't go to 6. Or I'm trying to think things that don't work. 5 doesn't go to 4 in classical music. right? So there are definitely limitations on these things, but 1 can really go to anything. In comparison, 4 is much more constrained. 4 wants to go to 5, 4 wants to go to 2, so 4 could go to 2 to 5. 4 can also go to 7, just like with that transition. The 1 chord wants to go to 4, and the 3 chord can go to 4. But as we said, the 5 basically never goes to 4 in classical music. The 2 really is not supposed to go to 4 in classical music. The 6 could go. I didn't put that in. 7 isn't going to want to go to 4. So 4 is much more restricted than 1 is. Okay? And then I threw in some likelihoods here. If you're on 4, you've most likely to have come from a 1 chord, but you could have come from a 3 chord, 10% likelihood. If you're on 4, you're most likely going to go to 5, but you could go to 2 also, almost equally, and then a small possibility that you'd go to 7. With this idea on the previous page that this kind of diagram, like that the Bengalese finch uses to create a whole bunch of songs with its syllables. It just has a few syllables, but it can recombine them in different ways. That's not random, but it's infinite. This is the same thing with chord progression. There's 7 chords here. There are an infinite number of ways that you could move between these things without breaking any rules. You would never have to go from 5 to 4 or to go from 2 to 4, those things are illegal in classical music. You would never have to break those rules, and you could still have an infinite number of paths around this circle.